And recording has started.
Brilliant. I can see everyone's like joining now. In fact, I wonder if I can get rid of this notification that keeps mute these notifications. I don't need to know when everyone joins. Right. Okay, shall we begin?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for our webinar tonight, Caring for the Senior Horse. We have a very busy agenda. There's lots to share, so we are going to get cracking. If you arrive late, we are recording the session and it will be available on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to watch it back at your convenience. Okay, so your presenters today, we have Sarah. Do you want to have a wave and say hello, Sarah? Yeah,
Good evening,
Sarah
everybody.
is our product manager here at Spillers. How long have you been at Spillers, Sarah?
15 years now.
Quite a while. So Sarah knows everything you need to know about practical tips for looking after your senior horses and ponies. And we are also very privileged to have Pat Harris joining us today. Pat, how long have you been working at Horse Care?
I've been at Mars for 30 years now.
Wow. So Pat will be delivering everything science for us and sharing some of her research highlights, which I'm sure you'll all find really interesting. So the agenda for today, Pat's going to start us off with the science and show us some really cool charts and graphs and some stats. And then Sarah will sort of follow that up with some practical applications. We will then finish with some Q&A. We're going to try and whistle-stop tour through it, so we'll have about 10 minutes or so at the end. And we do invite you to come, off mute if you can, if you want to speak, or just write in the chat. I should just add, we have Isabel here supporting us today. I'm sure many of you have either seen Isabel presenting or met her at a show or on your yard, and she's going to support with the chat as well. So if you have questions sort of throughout, please feel free to just pop them in the chat straight away, and Isabel and myself, if I can, we will both try and help keep up with the chat box as well. And finally, a reminder, if you've got a really sort of bespoke or very specific question for your horse or pony, we do have a dedicated Careline team, and we can pick up the phone to you or reply via email, whichever is best for you. Okay, let's begin, Pat.
Ella, can I just check? We've had a comment, just somebody can't hear. Is anybody else having any problems? Can they put a note in the chat if they are? We certainly can hear amongst ourselves. So I'm not sure, Kirsty, if it's a problem your end. Maybe try turning on and off your... Yeah, everybody else can hear. So Kirsty,
Okay.
maybe try logging on and off yourself. Thank you, everybody else, for letting us know.
Okay, right. Off you go, Pat.
Brilliant. And thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for allowing me to come and talk about some of our equine science. Anyone who knows me, that senior horse is one of my absolute passions, and I could talk all night on this topic. So I'm looking forward to sharing a bit. And what I'm going to do is just give a flavour of some of our work. We've been working on the senior horse for decades now, and we keep on trying to find new ways to help you so you can manage your horses better. And some of the things we've done is just to find out more information. And this is a study that we did with the University of Kentucky, but we did this and we got responses from several thousand owners. And we wanted to know, when we were asking about their senior horse, and we wanted to know when they retired their horse from structured exercise. And it's interesting and not surprising, but a couple of things that are shown in colour here is that when they were all aged 1 till 9, about 51% of those that retired at that age was because they went into breeding. That's pretty obvious of what it might be happening. Look at the other end. I quite like this. These are horses over 30, and about 22% of them over 30 were retired because they deserve to be retired, which I think over 30 is not bad going, to be honest. We did find out a lot of work about how you manage horses when they're still competing over 15, 20 and even 30 years of age, and we've just got a paper coming out now. But if we go to the next little bit, what I think was important for you, here I've highlighted that obviously that some of the problems of why horses are retired, even at that 1 to 9 years of age, a high percentage of it is because of health problems. And that is what I've spent my career, is trying to work out how I can better diagnose and better help to manage and feed, in particular, those horses. So on to the next slide. And then we asked people about one of their particular horses and what conditions they had. And these were some of the major conditions at that moment that they had. One was osteoarthritis, obviously, dental disorders and lameness, and Isabel, someone else has got some problems.
Thank
So do you want to just,
thank you. I'll deal with that.
so just there was someone not able to see the slides, so it's a little bit tricky to know which figures I'm showing without the slides. But anyway, so lameness, now PPID, if we go to the next bit, please, Bella. So dental disorders, Sarah is going to talk a lot about that, on how you can help to manage and feed those animals. Next, please, Bella. PPID, which is equine Cushing's, I'll talk a little bit about this, but we're doing a lot of research in here, trying to understand how to diagnose it, how to manage it, and what best we can do to support you. Next slide. When we asked people about what kind of health conditions they were seeing that related to body composition, I think you can see here that obviously muscle mass, and we'll pick that up, is important, but so was body condition scoring. And often people think that older horses are going to have low body condition, but a relatively high percentage of these thousands of animals was still obese and high. And again, Sarah will pick this up. But one of the things that we looked at was that mainly people were diagnosing, or not diagnosing, coming up that they had this body condition just by looking at the animal. And actually that can be quite difficult. And we often recommend you do body condition scoring, but we all know that that can be quite subjective. And some people find it, they'd much rather to measure. So we listen to people, and if we go to the next slide, we listened to people and we came up for an alternative for those of you who actually want to have a number. And so basically this is a body condition index, and you can measure your horse at various points. You put the measurements into our formula and you come up with a value. And this study was published early last year, and it's a combination of a number of studies all over the world. Now, there are some areas where it doesn't work particularly well, but it can help for those people that you just want to have a number. So go and have a look on our website. Carry on, please. I mentioned about muscle loss, and we found this to be really important because this is one of the earliest signs for PPID. And in this big survey, nearly 20%, that's a fifth of the people here, reported low muscle mass. Next, please. And one of the things is that age was a major contributing factor. This is something that happens with older animals. And what we want, if you go to the next one, you can just see here how age really does affect. This is the percentage going from 15 up to 35. And what we really want to do is to pick this up early, because sometimes muscle loss, we can reverse it or we can manage it. And it's not necessarily purely due to this age. It might be due to another condition, or we can try and help support the animal because it's got muscle mass loss. So if you're going to do this, you've got to have a better way of identifying. So next slide, please. So Elisa in Kentucky came up to the muscle atrophy scoring system. And this is from our website, where we've converted it from the paper that's been published, and then we've converted it. And it's really important to note that there are different scales for the neck, the back, and the hindquarters, depending on whether your horse would be considered in the lean or the adipose category. And that's quite important when we get onto the next slide. So carry on. So this is where it tells you, you go to the neck and you just decide which scale, you go to the back or you go to the hindquarters. If we go on. And what we do when we do science, We developed this scoring system. We tested it when we developed it. We published it. We got people to critique it, and they said, yeah, it's good science, you can publish it. But we don't stop there. We go and check it again. And this was a study done by a different group together with us, but this time it was over in Australia. And we tested it in some animals with and without equine Cushing's or PPID. And what's important, if you look at the slide on the right, is they had the same body condition score. So they were exactly the same body condition score, but because of the way this scale works, we were able to pick up that those PPID animals in general had a much higher atrophy score. But it also enabled us to pick up an animal in that non-PPID group. You can see it had a really high score between 10 and 12. That enabled us to pick that animal up and go ahead and try and find out why. So this is a system that you can use to monitor your animals and pick it up early, and then have a conversation with your vet and your nutrition advisor of what might we be able to do to help, or at least it enables you to monitor. And this is the way we do science. We try and do it, then we test it. If we go to the next one, because what the other things we've done, that was a little bit about some of our scoring systems that we've developed. And I would like to say that the Cresty Neck scoring system, if any of you have heard about that, we were involved in developing that as well. So we're really keen to come up with things that you can use and vets can use. Now, Sarah's going to talk about this, obviously, but it's a passion of mine, as I said. It's really difficult when you're coming up with a plan. You have to think about the horse, but we have to think about you, what's available, what kind of things you like, and also even to the extent what type of ride you like. And that all affects what we feed our horses. But if we go to the next, the thing is that horses are different, and older horses are the same. Some of them are retired, some have dental, some have muscle loss. If we go to the next, but others have no dental issues. They're in active work, and they, as I said before, can be obese. And we need to look at all of that. So when we were coming up of how do we look to the diets, we wanted to check what are the core things they need. If we go to the next, please. They're the same as any other animal. They need the water, the energy, the protein, and the vitamin and minerals, but they might need them subtly different. And we wanted to check what and where they may be different. So if we go on to the next. But as I said, the actual diet you need to have for these senior horses, going back to my first slides, depends on what signs they're showing and how they're being kept and what you're doing with them. Some retired, some in work. Next one, please. And the great thing for me with my senior horses is that if we do our job right, they continue to carry on, and their requirements may change with time, but we change with them. So I love feeding older horses because we need to monitor them, and we just adapt as they change, and we change with them. On to the next. So one of the first things we did many years ago was to check some of the statements that were made. And it was often said that horses needed an increased protein because they had a reduction in their digestibility. But even these authors, a few years after they did their original paper, thought, do you know what? Maybe it was because they had parasite damage rather than they were old. So we repeated this because we wanted to know what we needed to do. So next slide. And in our work, when we looked at animals over 20 or less than 15, no difference. Now that's on digestibility, but going back to that muscle mass, next bit, you could just do the next one. Just because no, back one. Important point. We really, because they may not have a difference in protein overall digestibility, but to help support that muscle loss and muscle, we need to really make sure they have the right amount of quality amino acids. Next slide, please. Energy, no difference. The only difference is that they're less able to deal with changes in temperature, and other work has shown we have to be careful. But as far as energy, they're the same. Carry on. And we wondered why, because in every other species, it does tend to decline with age. So why not in our horses at the ages we were looking at? And here we looked at, again, we had old and young horses, all had a good worming program, and went on, next one. And we fed them 3 different diets: hay only, hay plus a high starch grain-based feed, and a hay and a high oil-based feed. And you can see on this graph on the right, no difference in energy, NDF, crude protein or fat. But next one. But we looked at their bacteria in their gut, so important for digestion because the horse relies on these to do a lot of their digestion. And what we interestingly found that in our studies, there was differences in that microbiome with the diet. Isn't surprising because different bugs need to be able to be present to maximize the digestion of those different nutrient sources. But we found differences, but we didn't find any differences with age in the microbiome themselves. But what we did find is that older horses had a less diverse microflora, regardless of what diet they were on. And what do I mean? That little picture shows very simply the number A, the bacteria A, are less diverse than B because B has 3 colors. Actually, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 colors. No, and than A. So the point is that these older horses, if you now go to the next one, please. This reduction in diversity, these were healthy older horses, may mean they're more susceptible to certain gut issues. So this is why we're extra careful in our older people and when we make changes and where we feed them. And this is the kind of thing that our work is trying to help support. Why do we perhaps need to be more careful? Next slide. We repeated it because again we did that in horses. Our ponies the same, and this time we took a large number of Welsh mountain ponies, and here we looked at control, aged and obese animals, and we fed them the same hay, same management, same time of the year, just different animals. And what did we find? Again, no differences in digestibility with age, same as the horses. Next. No consistent changes in bacteria with age, same as the horses. But interestingly, in ponies, we didn't see that effect of diversity. And possibly not, many of you have ponies, might understand why this might be so. Next slide, please. We think that there may be that for the same aged ponies are actually physiologically younger than a similar aged horse. Now that is going to still be very individual. Some animals age older quicker than others, but it looks like there is a little bit to that story about ponies being a little bit different from horses. On to the next, please. We looked at minerals and vitamins. Again, no difference between old and young. We did find next a little bit about relink with our PPID, but what we found, which was quite useful, was the next one, is that when we added above the minimum that's normally recommended, we could beneficially improve some of our vitamin levels and importantly that muscle score. So that actually trying to look at our diet and making sure it's an appropriate for our older horse can be very helpful. Next slide, please. And another thing that can sometimes be helpful in our older animals, and certainly those with PPID, is to think about vitamin C. Now, it's a little bit like us. Horses can make vitamin C, but a long time ago we showed there is a real importance of vitamin C in lung health, and therefore it may be helpful to give some extra bioavailable vitamin C, certainly if your horse is having repeated respiratory problems as an older horse. Carry on, please. One area that we've spent a lot of time over the last few years is about the starch and sugar intake, and Sarah's going to talk a little bit more, but I'm going to show you quite graphically, I hope, the reasoning why. And here we got non-obese mares. They're all around the same body condition score. They all came, or most of them, from the same type background management, good worming history. The ones on my left, I have no idea on yours, but they're the adult, and the ones on my right are in the paler colour. Horses were the older ones. And then what we did, we fed them on different diets, and then we looked at their response to being fed a slightly more starch-based feed. And I think you can see that the older horses, these were healthy older horses, all had a marked response of insulin to that. So they are more sensitive to insulin as they get older. Very individually variable. It's not consistent, but you need to think of that as your horse gets older. If you go on a slide. We went on and found out what are the best diets for these older horses. And here we did a study where we just fed a very low diet, low sugar and starch diet, and then we either added starch or fiber, or we added sugar. And I think you can see here we compared adult and aged, and we showed that when we fed a fiber-based diet, a very low NSC diet, they were just the same as the younger animals. But in particularly when we fed a high starch diet, they had a much greater insulin response. So this is why we need to be, next please, we really do need to think that probably in all senior horses, we need to restrict their starch and sugar intake. Not ridiculously, but we just need to be cautious. On to the next, please. Now, if they are very ID, and this is insulin dysregulation, this is when it's been confirmed by a vet and they're very, and they're more prone to laminitis. What our work has shown in those animals, so that we don't get an augmented, what I call an augmented, it just means you get an increased, a marked increase when you feed them in insulin. We do need to feed very low levels. Now there's a point here, and just the next, please. I would say the biggest thing I've learned over 30 years, which all of you know, is horses don't read textbooks and they don't follow textbooks. They are all individual animals. And this is really important. So if you are concerned, talk to your vet and someone who can give you nutrition advice. And often we need to test your animal on your feed and look at it. On to the next, please. Final one, just to let you know that we did another survey. Here we wanted to know how long do people transport horses, because we were a little bit worried whether transportation could alter our diagnostics. So this is a paper only published last year, but it talks about that most, certainly in America this was, most horses were transported for 3 hours or less, and often to the vet, so often for diagnosis. Next slide, please. And what we're trying to look at is how does that affect your diagnosis for insulin dysregulation or PPID? Next, please. And what it does, that especially in our older animals, you may have the potential to have a misdiagnosis. Now, it depends on when the samples are taken. So this is why I'm said we're trying to help you. How do you feed? How do you manage? How do we detect? On to the next. And certainly for Cushing's, we're recommending to vets to wait for at least 30 minutes after transportation before you test. And these are some of the kind of practical things that we're trying to do to help that aren't directly linked to feeding, but they're trying to be your partner in care. So on the next, please. Now, we have hundreds of papers, literally hundreds of papers. We're really happy to share if you're interested. These are just some that I've used to put these slides together for this talk. And I know it's been a gallop, but I know you really want to hear from Sarah about the practical and how we're using this. So I'm going to pass it on. But anytime anyone wants to talk senior horse, I'm definitely your vet.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Pat. Okay, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Bella. And of course, thank you very much, Pat, and to everybody for joining. Like Pat, I'm really pleased to be here this evening because seniors are one of my favourite topics too. And one of the horses that will hold a very special place in my heart forever was part of our family for until she reached the age of 30. So as Pat has already shown, no two seniors are the same. every senior horse or pony is an individual, and we must remember that, because it means there's no one size fits all approach to feeding or managing them well. And Pat has already touched on many of the factors that we need to consider when deciding on the most suitable diet for them. So while some horses show signs of aging in their late teens, others continue to live healthy and active lives well into their 20s or even their 30s. And there's no set age at which we need to introduce a senior specific feed or indeed a change in diet. Healthy horses in good body condition may not need any changes in diet, while those that show multiple signs of aging will need more specialist care. This evening, hopefully I'm going to share lots of helpful, useful, practical tips with you. But of course, it is really important that if you need specific advice, do reach out to our Careline team. They've got lots of experience, and I happen to know that they've all got a particular soft spot for seniors. So they will be delighted to help and guide you through your questions. Next slide, please, Bella. So monitoring your senior horse or pony regularly is really key to helping you identify when changes in diet or management might be needed. So look out for those signs of aging as they start to creep in. You, of course, know your horse better than anybody else. Look for changes in their health. Of course, speak to your vet about those, and changes in their behaviour. And monitoring their weight and body condition regularly is really important. There are lots of different options for doing this. Pat's mentioned some of them already, but of course there are weigh tapes. You could measure belly girth, heart girth, assess their body condition score, or try using the new body condition index. And Isabel on the 27th of February will be hosting another webinar, and she's going to take people through lots of practical tips on how you use some of these tools. So do think about signing up for that webinar to learn more about that. But assessing body condition in senior horses and ponies can be particularly challenging. So just to touch on a couple of those challenges, with body condition scoring, sometimes a loss of muscle loss may be mistaken for fat loss. Or if your senior's got softer muscle because they're in less work or retired, that can sometimes be mistaken for excess fat. And if you've got horses and ponies with PPID, they can sometimes have regional fat pads despite being thin overall. So we need to be careful when we're using body condition scoring systems with those. And again, our Careline team will be more than happy to help you with those. And there are also links on our website to several different tools that you can try using. If you can, thank you, Bella. And then through to the next slide. So as Pat said, not all seniors are prone to weight loss, and we know that excess weight gain and obesity carries several health and welfare risks for any horse, but it can exacerbate a few things that can occur with aging. So joint strain, difficulties regulating body temperature, and also age-related declines in immune function, which we call inflammaging. So there are plenty of reasons to keep your senior's waistline in check. Next slide, please, Bella. If, on the other hand, your senior has lost weight, it's important to try and identify the cause of that weight loss. Dental issues are one of the most common reasons that senior horses lose weight. Sometimes weight loss can be simply down to a shortfall in calories, but also it might be due to an underlying clinical condition. Getting too hot or getting too cold can contribute to weight loss. There may be an appetite problem, and if your horse seems reluctant to tuck into their dinner or eat up their forage, then it's important to question why that loss in appetite has occurred. And we also need to think about changes in herd dynamics as well. And we're going to touch on all of these points as we go through the slides. Next slide, please, Bella. But regardless of your horse's body condition, forage should be the foundation of every senior horse or pony's diet if they don't have dental issues. I'm sure all of you listening this evening are aware that a high fibre diet is essential for maintaining digestive health. Forage is also really important for fulfilling the horse's need to chew, and that helps to support their gastric health as well as their mental well-being. And forage provides a significant source of calories. So that's important, of course, for helping your horse to maintain a healthy weight. If they're a good doer and they're prone to piling on the pounds, then you might need to think about how you manage the calories provided by forage. Next slide, Bella. So just a few tips for you to consider if your senior is prone to gaining weight or is overweight already. You could consider strip grazing or using a grazing muzzle. You could try feeding soaked hay because soaking hay helps to reduce the sugar content, and of course less sugar means fewer calories. But when you're looking for ways to restrict forage intake, bear in mind that some of the commonly recommended strategies for weight loss might not be suitable for some seniors. So, for example, if your horse has got arthritis in their neck, that can make pulling hay from a hay net uncomfortable. So, hay in a net at all might be unsuitable, but particularly things like double netted small hold haylage nets might not be appropriate. And also, if your horse has got dental issues, then feeding straw as a partial forage replacer might not be suitable either. If you are restricting forage intake, it's important to remember that for most horses and ponies, there are a few exceptions, but in most cases, total forage intake shouldn't be restricted to less than 1.5% of current body weight, so not their ideal weight, what they weigh now, on a dry matter basis. So for a 500 kilo horse without grazing, this would mean weighing out approximately 9 kilos of hay per day if you're feeding it dry. Remember, this is a minimum. Or 11 kilos if you intend to soak it before feeding. Now, the term dry matter can cause quite a bit of confusion, and so can the differences in feeding rates. So if you'd like some more tips on this, there is a recording of a previous webinar that we've done on forage. And again, our Careline team will be more than happy to have a chat with you by phone or by email and guide you through what this might mean for you in practice. Next slide, please, Bella. So, troublesome teeth. Pat stressed earlier this evening that it's really important that we look out for signs of a dental problem and that we manage these horses really carefully. So, dental checkups are important for horses of all ages, but it is important to bear in mind that seniors might need more frequent checkups, either from a vet or an equine dental technician. Dental issues can lead to weight loss, as we've already said, but they can also lead to digestive concerns such as colic and loose droppings. And when we talk about dental issues, this might include lost teeth, worn teeth, diastemas, which are gaps between the teeth, and even osteoarthritis of the jaw. So sometimes it might not be the teeth themselves that are the problem. So do look out for signs of pain or difficulty chewing between checkups. So Bella, next slide, please. And we've got a list here of things that you can look out for in addition to weight loss and digestive problems. Quidding, that's a term we use to describe dropping feed from the mouth. And I know Isabel several times, and I've heard horse owners tell me the same thing, that just because you can't see a horse quidding doesn't automatically mean that it's not happening, because if they share a field with other horses and ponies, sometimes their companion might be very good at hoovering up those quids before you've had a chance to see them. Reluctance or refusal to eat, of course, can be the sign of a dental problem, as can bad breath, obvious pain or discomfort when chewing, always chewing on one side, facial swellings, finding long fibre, whole cereals or partially undigested feed in your horse's droppings. I'm sure your unhorsey friends will give you some very strange looks, but looking at your horse's droppings can tell you an awful lot. So count them, look at them, keep an eye on what's coming out. It can give you a lot of information. And also reluctance to accept the bit or changes in ridden behaviour. Next slide, please, Bella. Now, if, like me, you suffer from sensitive teeth, you will know that they can be rather painful, and tucking into an ice cream is probably not high on your list of favourite things to do, even if the weather is warmer than it is now. But you might be surprised to know that senior horses can have sensitive teeth too, and this can make them reluctant to drink very cold water. So a few practical tips that might help you manage this is you can try adding hot water to water buckets to take the chill off. You can try using warm water to mix, dampen and soak feeds. Do use warm, not boiling water. And also remember that reduced water intake is a risk factor for colic, particularly in stabled horses that are fed dry hay. So do keep an eye on how much your horses are drinking as far as possible too. Next slide, please, Bella. So some dental issues can be resolved, but those that, or managing those that can't successfully, often relies on replacing some or all of the grass, hay or haylage in the diet with a hay replacer, or sometimes people call it a forage replacer. And horses with very poor teeth may need 100% of their diet replaced with a mash. Including short chopped fibre in the diet for those that can manage to chew it efficiently is ideal where we can, because it helps to encourage chewing. But do bear in mind that short chopped fibres, or chaffs as you may know them, are often unsuitable for horses with diastemas, those gaps between their teeth. Next slide, please, Bella. So I already mentioned about including short chopped fibre where we can, and feeding a mash. And remember that horses are fed by, or should be fed by, weight, not by volume. And the feeding guides on the back of the pack refer to the dry weight of feed. So if you are feeding a mash or any other type of feed that needs soaking first, do weigh your feeds before soaking. And with mashes in particular, the increase in volume once you've soaked them can make it easy to overestimate how much you're feeding. If you are replacing 100% of your horse's diet, for a 500 kilo horse, that could mean feeding around 11.5 kilos of hay replacer a day, and that's the unsoaked weight. Remember, if your horse or pony is prone to laminitis, and we've got some more tips coming up on this, choose feeds and hay replacers that are low in starch and sugar, and avoid grass-based products for laminitics, as they may be high in water-soluble carbohydrate or sugar. And remember that not all chaffs or fibre cubes or mashes are suitable for feeding as a hay replacer, and some should only be used as a partial hay replacer. So always check the feeding instructions carefully. And of course, if you've got any questions or concerns, speak to the manufacturer or a nutrition advisor. Next slide, please, Bella. In practice, you can feed 1 kilo of hay replacer, dry weight, to replace 1 kilo of unsoaked hay. If your horse or pony doesn't have access to grazing, ideally hay replacers should be divided into a minimum of 4 meals. And you might need to consider separating horses fed hay replacers at meal times to prevent sharing or bullying. Sometimes their companions can be a bit too eager to put their head in their bucket and share it with them, which is not what we want. And also check whether your hay replacer contains added vitamins and minerals, because if it does, it might not be necessary or indeed appropriate for you to add a balancer or a vitamin and mineral supplement on top. Next slide, please, Bella. And that's just a reminder that we do have several hay replacers in the Spillers range, and they do all contain added vitamins and minerals. So what about what goes into the bucket? Now, balancers are a great option for seniors that maintain weight easily, or indeed too easily sometimes, on forage alone. And that's because they provide a concentrated source of vitamins, minerals and amino acids or quality protein to balance forage. But the low feeding rate, typically around 500 grams per day for a 500 kilo horse, means that they add limited calories, starch and sugar to the total diet. Next slide, please, Bella. On the other hand, if your senior needs more calories, something that we get asked about a lot is the difference between hay and haylage. Now, that could be a whole webinar in itself. And again, you could look back at our recording on our forage webinar for more tips. But do remember that haylage is not automatically higher in calories, but because it contains more water, you do need to feed more of it on a fresh weight basis. So bear that in mind if you're feeding a measured amount rather than giving your horse free access to haylage. Because of the low feeding rate, as I said, balancers are not conditioning. They add very few calories to the diet. So if your horse or pony needs to gain weight, adding a balancer on top of their current feed, unfortunately, isn't going to help. But when you're looking for feeds, consider fibre-based feeds that contain low or restricted amounts of starch and sugar, and that helps to support digestive health, and it can help to reduce the risk of unwanted excitability too. So weight for weight, oil is around 2.5 times higher in energy or calories compared to cereal grains, but it's starch free. And I know sometimes owners consider adding oil from a bottle on top of their horse's current feed. That can help in some situations, but do bear in mind that high oil diets need to be balanced with additional vitamin E. So if you are thinking about adding oil on top of your horse's current feed, do speak to a nutrition advisor first to check that your horse's diet does provide enough vitamin E. And one last tip is to remember that feeding small meals is really important for maintaining and supporting digestive health. So a maximum of 2 kilos dry weight is our recommendation for horses and less for ponies. Next slide, please, Bella. If your horse or pony is prone to laminitis, then achieving or maintaining a healthy body condition and feeding a diet low in starch and sugar is really key to managing them. Now, again, laminitis could be a whole webinar on its own, and we do several of these, but very general tips for this evening. That, of course, means choosing fibre-based feeds that are low in starch and sugar. If you're feeding a hay replacer, make sure that hay replacer is low in starch and sugar too. Think about restricting or removing access to grazing, particularly at high-risk times of year. And ideally, have your forage analysed for water-soluble carbohydrate if you're concerned about the sugar content, and use hay soaking as a backup. Again, our Careline team can give you lots of advice on hay soaking and about having your forage analysed. Many, not all of them, but many horses and ponies with PPID or Cushing's syndrome are insulin dysregulated, which puts them at increased risk of laminitis. So do contact a nutrition advisor for specific advice here on how to manage your horse or pony's diet. Next slide, please, Bella. So we talk about choose a feed low in starch and sugar, but what does low really mean? Now, as a guide for those that are not severely insulin dysregulated, restricting starch and sugar intake from bucket feed, so we're not talking about forage, to less than 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight per meal should be a suitable guide for most horses and ponies. Now, that equates to less than 250 grams per meal for a 500 kilo horse. And there's a little tip there on the right-hand side about converting percentages to grams per kilo. But if your horse or pony is at very high risk of laminitis or severely insulin dysregulated, do contact us for more help. Next slide, please, Bella. So what if poor appetite is the problem? And some senior horses do simply become fussy with age. And you might think, well, why not? They've earned the right. But a loss of appetite can be the sign of an underlying clinical condition. So it is really important to seek veterinary advice if you have any concerns to rule that out. Again, dental issues could be the cause. Sometimes medication used to treat PPID can have an effect on appetite. Sometimes it might be to do with the environment or routine. So being separated from their companions can make some senior horses reluctant to tuck into their bucket or their forage. Changes in routine or getting too hot can also affect appetite. Next slide, please, Bella. So a few tips if you have got a reluctant or a fussy eater. If volume of feed is in a problem, volume of feed in the bucket, so your pony is feeling overfaced by larger meals, you can of course try dividing your feeds into smaller meals. You could try using a feed that contains added flavours or herbs, or you could consider adding warm water or small amounts of molasses, apple juice, garlic, herbs or mint to your horse's bucket. Do consider the risk, however, of prohibited substances if your super senior is still competing. And again, think about herd dynamics and the environment. Some seniors are more than happy to eat in a busy yard environment with lots of hustle and bustle and other horses around them, but others just prefer a quieter environment to eat in peace, perhaps with that one companion that they feel attached to. Next slide, please, Bella. Just like horses, tongue twisted. Just like older people, older horses can sometimes be more sensitive to changes in temperature and have difficulty regulating their body temperature. So they might start to feel too hot or too cold more easily. So in practice, this means that you might need to check and change their rugs more frequently than you do your younger horses. You might need to consider clipping or cold hosing or providing additional shade in hot weather. And from a feeding point of view, remember that getting too hot can affect appetite, but getting too hot and getting too cold can contribute to weight loss. So it's important to think about appropriate rugging and checking frequently. Next slide, please, Bella. Joint health is, of course, a big concern for senior horses, and pain from joint disease can affect appetite and your horse's overall welfare. So speak to your vet if you have any concerns. And look out for horses that are constantly snoozing while others are grazing, because that might be a sign that they feel too uncomfortable to lay down and rest fully. Next slide, please, Bella. So a joint supplement might be the first thing that springs into your mind when you're thinking about how you can support joint health, and they can be helpful, but they're not the only consideration. And one tip, if you are feeding a supplement, is to beware of bold claims. A good rule of thumb is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But in terms of other factors, remember, keep an eye on your horse's waistline, because carrying excess weight increases joint strain. Use it or lose it is a phrase that we've probably all heard before, and turnout does help to provide gentle exercise and keep joints moving. So avoiding stabling for long periods is helpful wherever possible, but do think about the type of field you're turning out in. So try to avoid uneven paddocks, steep inclines and heavily poached fields. And I mentioned briefly earlier on, arthritis in the neck can make pulling hay from a net uncomfortable. It can also make lowering the head to eat from ground level uncomfortable. And even arthritis in the front legs can make grazing uncomfortable. So in these situations, think about offering feed, forage and water from raised buckets or mangers. If you are competing, look for feeds and supplements that are Beta-Nops approved. Next slide, Bella. So this is the final slide from me this evening. I've mentioned herd dynamics a few times. Horses benefit in lots of ways from being turned out and being in a herd with other horses. But sadly, sometimes as they age, they do get pushed down the pecking order and they might be at greater risk of bullying. So look out for changes in herd dynamics, because older horses might lose out when it comes to feed, forage and water. Ideally, try and provide a large water trough or more than one water supply. And if you need to, consider feeding senior horses separately. So that's it from me for now, and I'll let Bella carry on with some exciting news.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure everyone enjoyed that. I did. It was great. So a couple of slides from me, and then we will open up the floor for questions. I actually turned off notifications, so I have no idea how many chats have been coming or not. But if you've got a question now, start typing it and we can pick it up in a moment. Now I've lost my clicker. Right. So because we love senior horses so much at Spillers, we have decided to set up a Facebook group called the Spillers Super Seniors Club. And the idea is we're going to create kind of a bit of a community where we really celebrate senior horses. So we'll be there, our nutrition advisors will be there to help with nutrition advice and queries, but mostly we really want to celebrate everything that senior horses do and embody. So we're hoping you will all join the club and sort of tell us what you're doing with your senior horse, give us some competition highlights, or perhaps your senior horse is retired and you're just, you know, having a lovely groom in the winter sunshine if the sun ever comes out ever again, that kind of thing. We're really looking to spread the love for senior horses, and obviously give you some really practical advice in between, sharing lots of things that Sarah shared today about management and feed. So yeah, if you can, we would love to see you there. And as a little sweetener to join the club, tomorrow morning there will be a giveaway in the club exclusively for club members, and that is to win a bag of your favourite Spillers Senior feed. So like I say, that will be going up live in the morning, so make sure you're in the group, and then first thing tomorrow this will pop up on your timeline, and all you have to do is comment with a picture of your senior horse or pony, and a winner will be picked at random. Okay, so I think we are on to questions. So Isabel, maybe you could tell us, are there any unanswered questions in the chat? Because I now can't see the chat because I've managed to get rid of it. You're also on mute.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just going to say I will pause recording because that's something we always do. I'll stop recording once we open the floor to the chat. So I'm just going to do that, and there are a few questions in there. There's been a little bit of discussion about individual cases.